Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Talk English. This is the place where learning English is slow, easy, and very fun. I am Lily.
I love that. It really, it just perfectly sets the tone, doesn't it?
It really does, because learning a new language is, it's actually remarkably similar to building a user interface for a brand new piece of
A
software.
user interface. How so?
Well, think about it. You don't teach someone how to use a complex computer system by just throwing them into the underlying raw code, right?
Right, yeah, that would be overwhelming.
Exactly. You start with the mechanics they already know intuitively in the physical world, like the drag and drop, the swipe.
Click. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right. You give them familiar functional tools to navigate an entirely unfamiliar environment.
Because the brain needs a bridge. It needs something concrete and predictable to hold on to while it processes entirely new phonetic and grammatical structures.
Yes, exactly. And in the transcript we're looking at today from that language learning show called Let's Talk English, that invisible functional foundation is really the entire point of the lesson.
Yeah, the hosts of that show, Tom and Lily, spend their time analyzing a recorded audio diary from a woman named Olivia.
And what's fascinating is that Olivia isn't talking about like philosophy or global economics.
Not at all.
She is detailing the absolute most mundane, repetitive parts of her daily routine. From the exact second her alarm goes off right through to her commute to the moment she goes to sleep.
Which is honestly a brilliant pedagogical approach. I mean, we often have this instinct to just rush straight to the penthouse of a new language, right? We want to express our deepest ambitions or debate complex ideas.
Oh, for sure. Everyone wants to sound smart immediately.
Exactly. But this source text argues that human connection actually lives in the basement. Discussing your breakfast or your commute might seem, incredibly boring on the surface.
Super boring.
Right. But functionally, it is the universal key to connecting with anyone, anywhere.
So true. I mean, think about your own morning for a second. When you woke up today, did you wake up or did you get out of bed?
Oh, that's a great distinction.
Because that tiny gap between opening your eyes and actually putting your feet on the floor is exactly the linguistic gap this lesson is trying to close for you.
Right.
Olivia tells the hosts she wakes up at 7 a.m., but she explicitly notes that she doesn't get out of bed immediately.
Yeah, she takes her time.
She does. She spends 5 minutes stretching first. Then it's a large glass of water to feel fresh, oatmeal with blueberries and nuts and coffee, simply because she loves the smell of it.
And notice how the hosts immediately contrast this with their own routines to create like a behavioral spectrum for the learner.
Right, to show different ways of living.
Exactly. Tom hears Olivia's routine and admits he is the total opposite. He jumps out of bed immediately.
Because he's hungry.
Yes, he goes straight for the coffee. He literally calls it his first priority and then eats eggs with toast.
And then you have Lily.
Right. Meanwhile, Lily positions herself as an early bird. She's up at 6:30 a.m., doing 15 minutes of yoga and eating yogurt with fruit.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's just fascinating how they use these highly specific physical actions to anchor abstract vocabulary.
It really is.
I mean, dedicating a significant portion of a language lesson to dissecting the word immediately, which Lily explains just means right now or at once. It feels incredibly granular.
It does feel granular, yeah. But that granularity is the secret engine of context-dependent memory.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they aren't just teaching the dictionary definition of an adverb of time. They are mapping a piece of vocabulary to a physiological state.
Oh, I see.
By contrasting Olivia's slow, mindful stretching routine with Tom's habit of just throwing off the covers because he's starving for eggs, they give the word immediately a physical weight.
That makes so much sense. You aren't just memorizing a word. You are feeling the biological difference between a jarring start to the day and a mindful one.
Exactly. You're anchoring the abstract word to a feeling you've definitely experienced in your own body.
And it's funny because despite all their distinct differences, the yoga, the oatmeal, the eggs, Lily and Olivia actually share one very modern, universal habit.
Oh, checking their phones.
Yes, they both check their messages on their phones while they eat breakfast. Tom even points out that using phones in the morning is just, well, a common reality now.
Which serves as another cognitive hook for the learner. The source material is constantly building these bridges of shared reality.
Right.
Like, you might not need oatmeal with blueberries, but you probably stare at a screen while you chew your breakfast. The lesson is meeting the learner exactly where they live.
So true. Okay, so once the alarms have rung, the food is eaten, and the screens are checked, the narrative of the day has to shift.
We have to leave the house.
Exactly. We move from the private, internal world of the home out into the external, public world. And what's really interesting here is how the vocabulary shifts right alongside it.
The words change completely.
Yeah, we transition from domestic words to navigational ones. Olivia gets dressed at 8:15 a.m., and there's this incredibly specific detail they include. She wears a sweater and jeans because her office is cold.
I love that detail. And then she leaves the house at 8:45 a.m.
Right. But she doesn't take the bus or drive. She walks 20 minutes to work.
And she explicitly calls this her favorite part of the morning.
Because she gets to see the trees and the flowers.
Yeah.
And here's where the lesson introduces what they position as a really crucial concept, the commute.
Ah, yes. The journey from home to work.
Right. But I actually have to push back on this a little bit.
Oh, why is that?
Well, dedicating a massive chunk of a foundational language lesson to the commute feels slightly, I don't know, outdated to me.
Interesting.
In an era where a massive portion of the world is working remotely or in hybrid setups, isn't teaching people to talk about travel routes and office buildings just teaching them obsolete vocabulary?
I see why you'd think that. I really do. But from a sociolinguistic perspective, the commute is far more than just a transportation method.
Okay, what is it then?
It's a psychological boundary. Even if you work from a home office, you still experience a transition state between your personal identity and your professional identity.
Oh, that's a good point.
The source text focuses on the commute to teach the vocabulary of that transition. Look at how they contrast the methods. Olivia has this peaceful 20-minute nature walk.
Right.
Lily drives her car for 15 minutes, which is fast, but she specifically notes that she misses walking.
And then there's Tom, who cycles to work for 10 minutes on a blue bicycle. Because it's good exercise.
Exactly. And think about the underlying neuroscience of memory here. Why does Tom specifically mention a blue bicycle?
To be descriptive.
Yes, but more than that. Why does Olivia mention a cold office requiring a sweater? This is what linguists sometimes refer to as the Velcro effect.
The Velcro effect. I like that.
Yeah. When you attach a basic color adjective to a movement noun or a sensory feeling like cold to a location, you give the brain a visual and tactile hook.
So it sticks better,
Yeah.
like Velcro.
Exactly. A learner is infinitely more likely to remember the English word commute when they can attach it to the vibrant image of a guy pedaling a blue bike rather than staring at a boring flashcard that says commute verb to travel some distance between home and work.
You're totally right. It completely changes the texture of the lesson. It makes the language three-dimensional.
It brings it out of the textbook and into the street.
And speaking of the workplace, Olivia arrives at 9:05 a.m. and starts work at 9:15 a.m. She's a graphic designer. And rather than going into the complex mechanics of like Adobe software or client management, Lily simply explains to the audience that being a graphic designer means working with pictures and colors on a computer.
Which is honestly a masterclass in linguistic simplification.
It really is, because she's intentionally keeping the learner inside the target language.
Exactly.
If she uses complex industry jargon to explain graphic design, the learner has to pause, translate the concept in their head, and they completely lose the flow of the English sentence.
They'd get totally derailed.
Right. By stripping it down to pictures and colors on a computer, she maintains the momentum of the lesson while still conveying the meaning perfectly.
The pedagogy here is tightly controlled, and they do the exact same thing with the midday break.
Oh, the lunch routine.
Yeah. At 1 p.m., Olivia goes to a small park near her office to eat a salad or a wrap, and sometimes meets a friend to talk about their hobbies.
And the hosts highlight this as a healthy habit because she's getting fresh air.
Right. Again, whether you are listening to this in Tokyo, Buenos Aires, or London, stepping away from your workspace to get fresh air and talk about a hobby, it's a universally understood rhythm.
It's the shared human experience. But, you know, this actually brings us to the part of the transcript that I found the most profound.
Really? Which part?
Well, we have the ramp-up of the morning, the transition of the commute, the peak of the workday, but inevitably, the day has to wind down.
Sure.
And reading through this text, the hidden insight, the real aha moment for me, is how the language fundamentally shifts gears in the evening.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
We are using completely different linguistic engines for different parts of our day.
You're talking about the shift in verb states.
Yes, absolutely. In the morning and during the day, the language is entirely driven by action and efficiency. It's like the vocabulary of commerce.
Right. Commuting, arriving, designing, working.
Exactly. But the moment the clock hits 5:30 p.m. and Olivia finishes work, the verbs change. We move from doing to being. We shift from the language of efficiency to the language of identity and emotion.
It's the vocabulary of decompression.
Yes.
Olivia walks back home, arrives at 6 p.m., notes that she is usually tired, and then just sits on her balcony to relax.
And the source text masterfully uses this evening space to show how routine expresses who we are as individuals. Olivia cooks healthy vegetables and fish at 7 p.m.
Right.
Lily, who loves cooking just as much as Olivia, actually heads to the supermarket after work to buy fresh ingredients.
While Tom, on the other end of the spectrum, finishes work at 6 p.m. and goes straight into his garden to play with his dog, Max.
Who is always happy to see him, of course.
Of course. And Tom openly admits he's not a great cook, so he makes simple food like pasta or a sandwich.
What I love about this is that they aren't just teaching you how to say, I am eating a sandwich. They are teaching you how to communicate your personality.
Exactly.
Playing with your dog versus curating a complex meal of fish and vegetables. That tells the listener something fundamental about your values. It shows how you choose to send your energy when nobody is paying you for it.
And that leads perfectly into the final stage of the daily life cycle, the pre-bed ritual.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
This is where the source material does something highly sophisticated. Olivia washes her dishes, maybe listens to music, watches a documentary, or calls her mother.
Right.
But right before sleep, she takes a warm shower and reads a book in bed. She explicitly states this helps her mind stay calm before she goes to sleep at 11 p.m. to get her 8 hours.
And Tom jumps in right here to define that word calm for the learner. He explains it means peaceful and quiet, and makes a very distinct point of noting that it is the exact opposite of being stressed or excited.
But he doesn't stop at just the definition. He adds commentary. He states that reading a book is much better than looking at a phone before sleep.
Which is such a specific piece of advice to include in a language lesson.
Right. Think about what is actually happening in this exchange. The source text is encoding modern wellness values, specifically digital boundaries and mental hygiene, directly into the syntax of the language lesson.
Wow. Yeah.
They are teaching calm, not just as a vocabulary word to be memorized, but as a desired physiological state to be achieved through healthy habits.
They are modeling behavior, not just grammar.
Precisely.
It's kind of wild to think about a language lesson subtly coaching you on your screen time, but it works perfectly because it's framed as a natural conversation about daily habits.
And the person contrast continues right up until the lights go out.
Oh, right.
Lily is writing in her journal and going to sleep at 10:30 p.m., while Tom is staying up until 11:30 p.m. because, as he says, he likes the nighttime.
But importantly, the text notes he still ensures he gets enough sleep.
Always. Can't forget that part.
So we've essentially walked through an entire human day together, from the jarring sound of the alarm clock to the quiet moment the lights go out.
You really have.
We've seen all these different variations: the blue bikes, the cold offices, the early birds, the night owls. And at the end of the lesson, the hosts, Tom and Lily, do a quick review.
Right, cementing the vocabulary.
Yeah, they highlight phrases like wake up versus get out of bed, get dressed, commute, arrive, finish work, and unwind or relax.
Which really brings us back to the core philosophy of this entire pedagogical approach.
Oh, so.
Well, these aren't just random phrases pulled from a hat. They are the structural beams of daily interaction.
The building blocks.
Exactly. Fluency in any complex system requires absolute mastery of the base components. You cannot write a beautiful, sweeping symphony if your fingers don't instinctively know the basic scales.
That's a great analogy. We always have this urge to skip the boring stuff, don't we?
All the time.
We want to jump right into debates about cinema or politics to show off how smart we are or how much progress we've made. But this transcript proves that true human connection is built almost entirely on the mundane.
It really is.
There's a quote from Tom that really stuck with me. He tells his listeners, "Daily routines are the building blocks of English conversation. If you can talk about your day, you can talk to anyone."
Because the everyday routine is the ultimate common denominator.
Right.
I mean, no matter what culture you come from, what language you speak, or what industry you work in, we all sleep, we all eat, we all move through the world, and we all need to find a way to unwind.
We all share that.
When you ask someone about their morning, you aren't just making small talk. You are asking them how they interface with reality.
You're asking for their fingerprint.
Beautifully put.
And the show ends with this incredible call to action for their students that leans right into this idea.
Oh, the comment section challenge.
Yes.
Yes.
They ask the listeners to go down to the comments and write just one single sentence in English about a morning habit. Do you drink coffee? Do you do yoga? Do you walk your dog?
It's a very clever psychological trigger.
How does that work?
Well, it immediately forces the learner to synthesize everything they've just heard and apply it directly to their own life. It moves them from passive consumption to active communication.
They have to use the tools.
Exactly. They have to take the tools they were just handed and build their own tiny one-sentence interface.
It's so simple, but it's incredibly effective. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the hidden mechanics of daily routines and explored how the absolute simplest parts of our schedules actually form the architecture of how we connect with the rest of the world.
We really covered a lot of ground today, didn't we? From the neuroscience of memory to the sociolinguistics of the commute.
We really did. But before you go, I want to leave you with one final detail from the source material to ponder.
Oh, like this one.
Right at the very end of Olivia's story, right after she finishes detailing her highly optimized, perfectly scheduled, highly productive weekday,
She drops the cliffhanger.
she drops a tiny little cliffhanger. She casually mentions that on the weekend, she sleeps late and her routine is, quote, very different.
But she doesn't give us a single detail about what that routine actually is.
Exactly. It's a total mystery. She leaves it completely blank. So I want you to consider this. If our weekday language is built almost entirely on the vocabulary of efficiency, schedules, alarms, and necessity, what does the vocabulary of our completely unstructured weekend freedom look like?
That is a fascinating question.
When the foundation of necessity is completely removed from our day, how does our language change? It's something to think about the next time Saturday morning rolls around. Until next time, keep exploring the foundations beneath your feet. Goodbye.